Good afternoon, everyone. Um, Welcome to our spring quarter seminar series at the School of Education, specifically to the Graduate Group in Education. We welcome you all to our first spring quarter series talk for our series. This quarter, we decided to honor our PhD students who have finished or are finishing up their PhD programs this academic year. Typically, we have a range of folks from our faculty members, folks in our larger graduate group in education, and we do have students who participate, but given the circumstances of our current global health crisis that keeps us away from one another, we wanted to do something special this quarter to really highlight, lift, and celebrate students who are finishing up their programs. My name is Danny C. Martinez. I'm associate professor in the School of Education in Language, Literacy, and Culture. And I also have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Graduate Group in Education, which started this academic year. I want to welcome folks. I see folks from across our School of Education, from across the Graduate Group in Education, from across the UC system. I see folks from across the country. And I also see some family members here ready to support, again, lift and celebrate our guest today. I have the pleasure today of introducing our speaker, Adam Musser. I am part of his committee, so that gives me, I have the privilege of doing this to introduce him to you all today. Some of you know him very well, many of us know him very well, but I'm gonna add a personal touch to today's introduction, in addition to the typical introduction that many of you will find across websites when you Google Adam's name. So Adam Musser, okay, we've been talking about that. Adam Musser is a doctoral student in the School of Education at UC Davis, and he is in the Language, Literacy, and Culture program area of our department, of our school. Adam is committed to humanizing research methods that respond to the questions which disenfranchised and dispossessed communities want us researchers to answer. Within teacher education, he asks teachers to center the brilliance and curiosities of youth and to resist educational systems of racialized oppression. Before graduate school, Adam was a high school English teacher in Cleveland, a middle school humanities teacher in Seattle, and a language literacy teacher in the Belize Central Prison. So I met Adam at the 2016 AERA in Washington, DC, if I'm correct. This was a time when Doctors Maisha and Tori Nguyen were making their way to UC Davis from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And they asked us to meet with Adam just to encourage him to come to UC Davis and you know, to let him know a bit about the Davis community. And I met with him along with Dr. McCall Kurlander, who was the GGE chair at the time. And I was immediately on board with bringing Adam and hoping he would join us as a graduate student at UC Davis. And I have not ever been disappointed with him coming or with him being here. It's just been a pleasure working alongside with and learning from Adam. Adam has been very clear about his positionality across the time I've known him. And he's been very clear about saying this as a white cisgendered man. He is in full acknowledgement of what that means. And I have appreciated Adam's model of how what Bettina Love calls a co-conspirator. He has been a co-conspirator working, and I have seen him work alongside and with communities of color in various educational and learning contexts. I've witnessed this and have seen this modeled by observing and learning with Adam in my courses, through the work he did with Transformative Justice in Education, through a Spencer-funded conference series that I was a part of. And I've had the privilege to co-author an article with him, along with Dr. Katy de los Rios, who's here, Dr. Quijada, and others, through the Transformative Justice in Education series. And I continue to work alongside him as a co-author with work with Dr. Mariana Soto Manning, who's also here. So I've seen him walk as a co-conspirator in educational research and as a person. Adam's research is what we need right now when we think about equity, justice, and abolition in the field of literacy, in the field of English education, and as we consider ethnographic research methods. He is beginning Adam is engaging in the types of questions that we need as a field so that we can move forward and truly center youth of color, communities of color, and rethink what it means to ask what is freedom. and we'll hear this much in his talk, What is Freedom? While reading a draft of Adam's work, I had to remind myself that I had to actually give him critique and feedback on his dissertation. And it's something that I came back to at the end when we were having conversations, because I was already reading this work as a full manuscript and even more as a book. And I can't wait to teach Adam's book in my ethnography classes. He knows exactly what I'm talking about because he's been in that class where we read full on ethnographies. So at this point, I want to thank Adam, his partner Megan, for making their way to UC Davis and the Sacramento region, because we have learned much from having Adam and his family part of our time here at UC Davis. And I'm so excited that we were able to welcome Josephine as part of our beautiful community of babies who are going to change the world. So Adam, thank you for being here, and I pass it on to you.
Thank you, Danny. You are so generous. And let me just say to my mom and dad, it's not going to get any better than that. But I'm going to try. The title of my talk today is When I Think of Freedom, Youth Literacy Practices in a Carceral State. And I'm going to begin with what I consider the most important part, some acknowledgements. I am only here today because of so many others. And while I don't have time to thank them all, I did try to do so in my dissertation. So go ahead and read that. Today, I'm going to acknowledge the people most directly involved in my dissertation. First, to all the young people experiencing incarceration, to those who write toward freedom and those who just want to be free. Without your brilliance, nothing I say in the next few minutes would exist. But that is not enough. I know that is not enough. I see you, I hear you. I am in fact gathering people to listen to you. Thank you to the organization I call Writing is Our Right, which is a pseudonym, as are all the names and places I'll mention in my study today. To David, thank you for inviting me in and for doing this work with a giant heart. To Daniel, who taught me more about entering space than anybody else ever has, thank you. Some of you may know that I began my PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and when my advisor came to UC Davis, so did I. That was a major life decision, and so obviously the right one. I want to thank everyone in the UC Davis School of Education who welcomed me, and I want to especially shout out the family I found at the Transformative Justice and Education Center here. To Maisha, Tori, Raina, Maya, Jeremy, Amber, Vanessa, and Hodari, thank you. Ashe. I owe an inconceivable amount of gratitude to my dissertation committee and my qualifying exam committee. They nurtured this work from some ramshackle ideas to a qualifying exam to a dissertation. To Professor Bettina Ngueno in African American and African Studies, and to Professor Steve Athanassis, Professor Jennifer Higgs, Professor Danny Martinez, and Professor Maisha Wynn, thank you all so very much. And thanks to Danny and the chair, who is the chair of the Graduate Group in Education, and to the entire GGE for creating this PhD colloquium series and inviting me to be a part. Finally, of course, thanks to my family, especially you, Megan, and you, Josephine. And thanks to all of you in attendance, wherever you are. I'm honored to share this time with you. In our short time together today, I'm going to address the following: the socio-political context at the time of my study, the 3 research questions of my dissertation and the one I will present today, the theory, methods, findings, and analysis for that one research question, why any of this matters, or the implications of my study, and finally, what now and what's next. But first, I'd like to start with a story. In one of the last youth prison writing workshops I facilitated with Writing is Our Right, a young person who was 15 years old and who had been locked up for almost a year asked why we didn't provide certificates and awards for the writers. This dude wanted a piece of paper that showed he was an active member of our writing workshops. I shrugged. I asked, what do you mean? What do you have in mind? How is this going to help? I was skeptical. He told me that he could bring a certificate of participation to his next court date, that he would show the certificate to the judge and explain how he was spending his time while incarcerated. He said, and I quote, "We can bring the award to court, which can help us with sentencing." I looked around the room. Other guys were nodding their heads. And there it was, proof. The young people in this youth prison were writing, literally, to be free. Here is the certificate of achievement that we designed together that day. One of my PhD big sisters, we share an advisor, so that means we're family, is Dr. Keisha Green. Dr. Green writes that humanizing research is a collaborative process to be engaged in by both the researcher and participants. It is emancipatory, or in other words, used to liberate people and communities rather than further oppress, marginalize, essentialize, or exploit them. This is what I tried to do in and with my research. There are everyday young people in this country who are locked up, and they are writing to be free. A small effect of my research, but a major motivation is helping to make that happen. The title of my talk, When I Think of Freedom, comes from the title of one of the pieces composed by a young writer experiencing incarceration last year. To my knowledge, this study offers the first scholarly analysis of freedom as conceived by young people experiencing incarceration. In it, I argue that the conceptions of freedom articulated in their literacy practices represent transformative critical knowledge for educators in all settings. The struggle for freedom is not new, but it may be as urgent as ever. The consistent murders of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people and children by police remind us that nowhere is freedom equally available. What does it mean to be free in a country in which police officers murder Black people and are then themselves protected by the law? What does freedom even mean in these conditions? In the first week of 2021, we saw how freedom in the United States is incomplete, contradictory, and paradoxical. After hundreds of insurrectionists occupied the US Capitol on January 6th, attempted to overturn the democratic process, threatened the lives of members of Congress and the vice president, and killed one police officer, most were free to walk out of the building and fly home. Not even 6 months had passed since police in riot gear met protesters on the streets as they demanded justice for the extrajudicial killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many others. Who gets to be free in this country? Moreover, the effects of the global COVID-19 pandemic reveal how dangerous a purely individual personal sense of freedom can be. The disproportionate torment of COVID-19 in the United States is just one consequence of our society's failure to understand and to practice what freedom means and what freedom requires. Who, in fact, can be free in these conditions? Our lives in the United States are not nearly as free as the American myth suggests, or as we teach our young children in schools, though some of us, and here I obviously include myself, are reliably freer than others. To establish a starting point for how we might think and teach about freedom differently, I asked experts on the topic, young writers experiencing incarceration, what freedom means to them. Today, I present the work on the third of 3 research questions I asked in my dissertation. For 2 years, I engaged in a multi-sited ethnographic study of youth prison writing workshops in Northern California that sought to answer the following questions. What are the salient characteristics of the Writing As I Write program? When afforded time and space in structured writing workshops, what do young people experiencing incarceration write about? And how do young writers experiencing incarceration define freedom, and how do notions of freedom emerge in their work? These questions built on one another. As I began to understand how Writing As I Write operates and what it achieves, the second question became important to understanding the meaning-making activity that occurs in Writing As I Write workshops. In answering the second question, it became clear that young writers are always writing about freedom. Thus, the third question emerged. If freedom is the shared object and desire of young writers experiencing incarceration, what exactly do they mean when they say they want to be free? On an average day in 2018, which is the most recent year for which we have this data, these data, according to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, more than 37,000 young people were held in youth prisons across the United States. While this number has been decreasing since the year 2000, when more than 108,000 young people were incarcerated, it is still more than the total number of high school students in Seattle and Boston, and it is 3 times greater than all the high school students in Washington, D.C. These young people wake up in locked cells on concrete beds they call slabs. They put on the same clothes every day. They brush their teeth in prison. They attend school in prison. They eat and drink and bathe in prison. They are told when to do all of these things and for how long. Their phone calls are limited and recorded. Visits with their families often take place on separate sides of security glass. And every evening, a pearl drop of toothpaste is squeezed onto their toothbrushes by staff. They go to sleep in prison knowing the next day will be a lot like the last one. And yet the young people who are locked up are never only incarcerated bodies under state surveillance. They are also subjects of their own experiences. Young people dream in prison. They read, write, and rhyme in prison. They resist in myriad ways, effectively and ineffectively, productively and problematically, the social conditions of their incarceration. And all of them want to be free. I argue that young writers experiencing incarceration offer necessary perspectives on freedom for educators in all settings, and that these perspectives are too often lacking in the larger sociocultural projects on education, freedom, and abolition that I'm interested in. In his critical examination of social theory, justice, and freedom, James Garcia argues that it is, quote, at least as reasonable to turn to prisoners for a theory of justice and freedom as it is to turn to lawyers, judges, and professional philosophers. Scholarship with young people experiencing incarceration, and here I have in mind Wynne, Anima, and Mora and Christiankis, shows what is necessary going forward for educational research and what Wynne has already articulated. Young people experiencing incarceration, quote, have the right to name what they believe needs to change in the world around them in order to live the lives they desire. This is why we must ask young writers what freedom means to them. Furthermore, there is a long intellectual and political tradition of recognizing that the leaders and thinkers of freedom movements must include the very people who have been rendered unfree by systems of oppression. The Combahee River Collective declared that if Black women were free, everybody would be free, because the freedom of Black women would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression. Bettina Love writes that freedom is impossible without women and queer leaders being the thinkers and doers of abolitionist movements. And Angela Davis argues that those experiencing incarceration must be invited and included in freedom projects because without their participation and without acknowledging them as equals, we are bound to fail. I bring two theoretical frames to this work, critical social theory and critical literacies. Critical social theory helps me think about relations of power and knowledge, and who gets to produce knowledge and whose knowledges we count as meaningful and worthy. Patricia Hill Collins writes that critical social theories are bodies of knowledge and sets of institutional practices that actively grapple with the central questions facing a group of people differently placed in specific political, social, and historic contexts characterized by injustice. In my study, the group of people differently placed in contexts characterized by injustice are young writers experiencing incarceration. The central question facing this group is how to be free. Following Giroux, I framed the practice of critical literacy as the struggle to expand the possibilities of human life and freedom. As I read the work of young writers experiencing incarceration, I became interested in how these young people practiced freedom, how they thought about freedom, and what freedom meant to them. I asked, what does their work offer our own understandings of how to practice literacy, how to practice freedom, and how each practice activates the other? To practice critical literacy, as Freire argued, is both to understand that oppression is a historical process, which can be and has been resisted, and also to position oneself as an active presence in the unfolding of history. Critical literacy research begins by asking whose literacies are dominant and whose are marginalized, whose histories are voiced and whose are not, whose futures are imagined and whose are not, whose knowledges are taught and whose languages are learned and whose are not, who is and who is not free. My study builds on the theoretical and empirical foundations of critical literacy and critical social theory by elevating the knowledges of those who are marginalized, silenced, and ignored, young people experiencing incarceration. So I could talk about theory the whole time, but I know my audience. Let me get to methods. Here's just a quick snapshot of the data I collected from my dissertation in order to answer all three research questions. Throughout this study, I leveraged ethnographic research methods to understand how young writers experiencing incarceration conceived of freedom. As a participant in youth prison writing workshops for 2 years, I collected data from different places, people, and perspectives. Methods included 2 years of participant observation in youth prison writing workshops, textual analysis of more than 6,000 writing samples, including 150 writing samples explicitly about freedom, and open-ended interviews with young people in youth prisons. The multi-sidedness of my ethnographic study meant weekly writing workshops at 2 different youth prisons, one in Northern and one in Central County. In order to answer my third research question, which I'm presenting today, I authored 4 writing prompts on freedom that would be presented in 15 writing workshops across California youth prisons in the summer of 2019. I am a former high school English teacher, and before that, I taught and learned with young people and adults for 2 years in the Belize Central Prison. My favorite memory is teaching an old man named Anthony how to write his name. It took us weeks. He was so proud. Literacy really was power. I am also a white, cisgender, heterosexual man. I have always been made to feel at home in schools and classrooms. I'm getting a PhD because I am good at doing school, and a major fundamental reason I am good at doing school is because school was designed for me to be good at. This was not the case for many of the young people who participated in my study. Finally, I did research with young people experiencing incarceration, and I have no experience of being incarcerated. I went to a prison every day for 2 years in Belize and every week for 2 years in Northern California, and I always got to go home. The University of California is home to at least 2 different organizations of formerly incarcerated students, Beyond the Stats and Underground Scholars. Please look them up and support them. This study no doubt would have been different had it been conducted by one or more of those amazing scholars. Here is a cover of the Writing As I Write magazine from January 2020. The organization Writing As I Write started in 1996 in one Northern California County youth prison following the death of legendary hip hop artist Tupac Shakur. Its first magazine issue totaled 6 pages and was published after young people found out about Tupac's death, and a youth worker there offered writing about it as a way to express their questions and feelings of loss. Today, the magazine, which is published every 2 weeks, runs now more than 80 pages and regularly includes between 300 and 400 individual pieces of writing from young people on the inside. The writing that fills these pages comes mostly from youth prison writing workshops held weekly in dozens of youth prisons across California and a handful of other states in the US. The writing produced in workshops using my 4 prompts on freedom appeared in a summer 2019 issue of the magazine. There were 406 pieces composed by young writers in this issue, and I identified 150 that addressed freedom directly. By that, I mean the authors used one or more of the 4 following words: freedom, free, liberty, or liberation. These 150 pieces comprise the writing sample data I analyzed to answer my research question: how do young writers experiencing incarceration define freedom? As an example, here are 2 pieces that appeared in that issue. On the left is a piece that qualified for inclusion into what turned out to be my 150-piece data set. On the right is a piece that does not explicitly address freedom and therefore does not fit into the final analysis of what freedom means to young writers experiencing incarceration. I analyzed these writings in 3 rounds of coding, grounding my codes and categories in the data to develop themes across these young people's similar but different conceptions of freedom. In the first round of coding, I employed in vivo codes, which preserve participants' meaning in their own words. Sharmaz argues that in vivo coding, quote, helps us preserve participants' meanings of their views and actions in the coding itself. I positioned the authors of the writing samples as critical and creative theorists on freedom, so I chose to develop the first round of codes in their own words. Here I present a snapshot of the 10 codes on how young writers define freedom. They are highlighted in blue. Taking away freedom, doing what you want to do, being with family, eating, being locked up, being mentally free, hanging with homies, blaming self, losing freedom, doing whatever. The second round of coding was focus coding. Focus coding focuses on conceptual similarities between initial codes and is helpful in developing thematic categories from initial data. Saldana explains that focus coding categories, quote, are constructed emergently from the reorganization and categorization of participant data. As I moved from codes to categories, realizing what ideas fit together and which were clearly distinct, I developed 16 categories of freedom. These are highlighted in blue and displayed on the left: economics, family, friends, home, interior freedom, jail, losing freedom, making choices, pleasures, power/control, reading/writing, schooling, streets, surveillance, system, and what you want. I wrote analytical memos as I raised codes to categories, and I continue to do that as I develop themes from these categories. Here I want to show the messiness of ethnographic qualitative research and its coding process. This is a screenshot of an analytical memo as I worked from tags, codes, categories, and themes, always trying to ground my analysis in the data. And I'll read the highlighted pieces. Power comes up in one sense of writers admitting powerlessness over their situation. They write to be a social historian, quote, to tell how this place is. For another writer, poverty/system prevents him from being brave and moving forward, and I see power on both individual and systemic levels in that piece. Now I switch to power/control as I see, quote, controlling us/me in two writings that mention controlling explicitly. Streets becomes a category outside of jail, family, friends, system, and economics, but connected to all of these. I'm finding that a number of tags fit in multiple categories. For example, a tag messing up my life applied to this piece 1.67. I placed it in the category of choices because of tag messing up my life referenced I messed up my life bad. But that piece is also about family, system, and mental health, which is not its own category yet. From my coding and analytical memoing, 5 themes on freedom emerged. The freedom young writers experiencing incarceration describe is a communal, physical, social, internal, historicized freedom. Young writers experiencing incarceration define freedom in terms of the human relationships they have been deprived of. They write of freedom in terms of physical spaces and opportunities that have been denied to them. Their understandings of freedom involve critique of unjust social systems, especially schooling and criminal justice. Freedom to these young writers means the ability to make sustainable life choices for themselves and their loved ones. Finally, freedom involves a history of freedom and the personal, familial, and social histories of their own experiences of freedom. Importantly, as the following writing samples will show, these themes are not exclusive of one another. Many writers express their definitions and dreams of freedom in ways that combine 2 or 3 themes in a single piece. To show where in the data these themes came from, I include here the coding categories that fit into each theme. Freedom in terms of human relationships included categories of family, friends, and the streets. Freedom in relation to physical spaces included categories of home, streets, and jail. Now I will present one piece of writing that illustrates each of the 5 themes. This is my definition of freedom by David. What freedom means to me is not being locked up, being social with others. I want freedom because I don't want people telling me what to do every day, and I need freedom to see my mom. I can't keep seeing my family behind glass. That's not freedom. I should have the freedom to eat and do whatever I want instead of people telling me what to eat and what to do. Here, David writes that being free means being social with others, and I need freedom to see my mom. David ends the piece by telling us what freedom is not. Seeing my family behind glass, that's not freedom. Young people experiencing incarceration often wrote of freedom in terms of the human relationships that mattered in their lives. Freedom for many young writers meant being free with family and friends. In this way, young writers clarified that an individual freedom without others to be free with is no real freedom at all. The ability to practice freedom with others echoes the ideas of many Black and Indigenous theories of freedom, in which none is free until all are free, in which we are all interconnected, and from which we understand the dependence of my freedom on your freedom. In their own work, young writers experiencing incarceration articulated calls for their freedom that simultaneously included demands for the freedom of their brothers, sisters, homies, and everybody. In these calls, they echoed a long tradition of understanding that freedom depends on other people to be free with, as well as other people being free. This is Remembering Freedom by Frankie. When I think of freedom, I imagine myself opening the door to my house, making myself food or anything I want when I want. I think about hearing the birds chirping, my phone ringing, dinging my little brothers on the head. I think about hearing them screaming and fighting early in the morning. I think about hearing my mom yelling at us too. Now that I'm locked up, I have no freedom and don't get any of that. I miss all of that. In remembering freedom, Frankie described images of their home, of preparing desired food and drink, of hearing the birds outside and their phone ringing. Frankie does not experience any of these sounds or sensations while locked up, and even misses the sounds of their little brothers screaming and fighting in the morning, and of mom yelling at us too. Frankie misses their family, misses the annoyance of little brothers and the predictability of mom's frustration. For Frankie, freedom means the sounds, sensations, joys, and frustrations of living at home, not in a cell. For many young writers, freedom was defined in relation to the physical spaces of the world that were or were not available to them. Being locked up has this effect. In prison, almost everything is denied to you. Freedom to perform the most basic functions, like going to the bathroom or getting a drink of water when you want to, has been taken away. Perhaps you are always allowed to go to the bathroom, but you must ask. The freedom to get up and go is gone, replaced by the requirement to ask permission from an officer or staff member to take care of your own body. The comforts of your home, of your bedroom, of your kitchen are all gone. You eat what is served when it is served. You do not walk or take the bus to school. You do not go to practice after school. You do not go out with your friends. You do not even go to school. You go to sleep in a cell behind bars, and you leave that cell only when it is opened. Here is I Will Fight for Freedom by Ronald. Economic freedom is the freedom to take care of normal necessities. We weren't taught freedom in school. My family members were slaves. I want to be a social justice, economic freedom, racial justice, and equality activist. I want to join an equal rights movement or association. I wish I could put that in an acronym. I also want to join movements. I want to participate in marches. I don't just want to. I will one day. I will help change this nation and the world. Ronald speaks directly to economic and historical freedoms before underlining their understanding of the point of freedom, to help change this nation and the world. Ronald implicitly critiques the economic structures that prevent some from securing normal necessities, and links this critique to the history of enslavement and the failure of their own schooling to teach freedom. Ronald points to social justice, economic freedom, racial justice, and equality as the outcomes of true freedom. Observing that these do not currently exist, Ronald commits to join movements and participate in marches. Here we can locate Ronald's commitment to freedom and justice within the long tradition of social movements and political protests. For Ronald, freedom is possible, but as the title of this piece makes clear, we will need to fight for it. Here is Being Free by Irvin. Freedom is something no one can take but only yourself. There is always consequences to your actions, but freedom is you making your own choices, being free with your family and friends, doing whatever you want and going wherever you want. Irvin begins by defending an inherent sense of human freedom, writing in the first line that freedom is something no one can take but only yourself. For Irvin, freedom is making your own choices and being free with your family and friends, echoing the communal sense of freedom that depends on others' freedom for one's own. Irvin closes by asserting that freedom means doing whatever you want and going wherever you want. For Irvin, freedom is a practice. It is something you do. And one way of practicing freedom is physical movement from place to place. The lives of many young people experiencing incarceration and those who are implicated in the larger criminal justice and border patrol systems in the United States are often in danger. Being safe and getting out of harm's way are often daily concerns for many young people today. Freedom of movement necessarily works its way into their conceptions of freedom. Like David earlier in my definition of freedom, Irvin considers other people to be free with a necessary quality of freedom. Irvin writes that being free means being free with your family and friends. But Irvin also represents an individualistic ethic of freedom that I critiqued throughout my study. Doing whatever you want and going wherever you want echoes dominant notions of freedom in the United States that are problematic, to say the least. When we define freedom as the ongoing pursuit of the full humanity of all people, there are limits on what we do and when and where we go. And this is Does Freedom Exist by Cruz. Freedom for me is when I'm on the other side of this place, but the question is there such thing as freedom? A lot of people say there is, but the last time I checked, there's rules to freedom. Just as you think you have freedom, you could lose it in a blink of an eye. We got so accustomed to people putting us down that we start shutting down and begin accepting things how it is, but that is why the system was created, to make us feel hopeless. They don't want us taking their spots. That is why we got to stay strong and faithful. Freedom starts when you're free from the inside. Cruz's critique of the system is even more focused on the system than Ronald's was above. In Does Freedom Exist? Cruz asks, is there such a thing as freedom? And questions what freedom really is if you could lose it in a blink of an eye. Cruz asks readers to remember why the system was created and argues that feeling hopeless about change is why change is so hard. But Cruz is committed to a world that allows them to be free and calls for others to be committed too. More than a personal ownership of freedom, Cruz's piece is a political call for solidarity. We got to stay strong and faithful. Freedom for Cruz is not given by others. Freedom, Cruz writes, starts when you're free from the inside. In the conception of freedom put forth by Cruz, the practice of freedom includes limits, requirements, and responsibilities. Cruz deals with the biggest question there is when trying to define freedom, its very existence. Countering the notion of limitless individual freedom proposed by Irvin, Cruz writes that there is rules to freedom. Freedom includes its own limits. In the poem's second stanza, Cruz exemplifies their own historicized self-awareness. Looking at the social systems that had denied humanity to so many people, Cruz argues that accepting things as they are and feeling hopeless is exactly how systems of historical oppression remain dominant. Here, Cruz illustrates an awareness of historical oppression, the social consequences of the oppression, and how human beings can respond within systems of oppression that are dominant in their lives. Freedom starts when you're free from the inside, Cruz writes, displaying and articulating a sense of self-awareness that can be used to resist systems that deny freedom and humanity to all of us. This study contributes to discussions at the intersections of teacher education, critical literacy, and critical pedagogy by clarifying what it is that young people want when they say they want to be free. Teacher education must confront the role schooling plays in the maintenance and reproduction of normalized violence in our classrooms against children, young people, and their communities. This has to include how we teach about freedom. When Black people are killed on the streets by police, who is free? When choosing not to wear a face covering in a global pandemic caused by a highly contagious virus is a question of personal freedom, what does freedom even mean? I believe that teaching and talking about freedom in ways that attend to human relationships, physical spaces, social systems, life choices, and self-awareness can transform our understanding and practice of freedom, and therefore our pursuit of every person's full humanity. One limitation of this study is the failure to test its theory of change. Can the notions of freedom documented here inform teacher pedagogy? How? Can new teacher pedagogy about freedom change anybody else's understandings and practice of freedom and its requirements? If so, how soon? Asking how teachers define freedom and how their pedagogies might be transformed by definitions of freedom advanced by young people experiencing incarceration is a necessary extension of my study. What happens when we put these young writers in conversation with young people in schools about freedom, humanity, and their futures? What happens when these ideas about freedom are put in conversation with teachers and teacher educators? The following questions extend the work of my study. How can notions of freedom advanced by young writers in youth prisons inform the practice and pedagogy of teacher education? How do pre-service teachers enrolled in a university teacher education program define freedom? How do teacher educators in the same teacher ed program teach about freedom? In what ways do their understandings of freedom inform their pedagogies? My own understandings and practices of freedom have been transformed by reading the work of young writers experiencing incarceration. What else might be transformed in the pedagogies and ontological assumptions of teachers when they discover and elevate knowledge with their students? How does one's reading of, for example, Beloved change when we think about freedom as defined by those who have experienced or are experiencing incarceration? How does one's understanding of the US Constitution and of the 13th Amendment change when we think about freedom as defined by those who have experienced or are experiencing incarceration? Those of us in teacher education must recognize our ability to direct new or different ways of thinking about students, families, communities, and the many knowledges students bring into schools. When and where else are young people being invited to imagine and write toward freedom? How often are young people invited to read and respond to each other's work as critical theorists? How else might we learn from the young people in our lives who are not experiencing incarceration? One space could be classrooms where writing takes place. What if we did not wait until young writers had to choose between their cell block and a youth prison writing workshop to ask them to think and write about freedom? What if we read their work seriously? What if we put them in conversation with the definitions and dreams of freedom documented in this study? What if we position them as important thinkers for the future world, broken and beautiful as it is, that we are leaving for them? I write from the theoretical position that the full humanity of every student must become and remain the primary focus of teaching and teacher education. How is teacher education at every level and for every subject oriented toward freedom that allows us to recognize and honor our full humanity? During the time I facilitated writing workshops with Writing is Our Right in youth prisons in Northern California, I wrestled with questions of abolition, reform, and complicity. To what extent did my presence in a youth prison sustain the carceral logics that our current state requires? How did all the work we did for Writing is Our Right help youth prisons be more humane spaces? Are more humane youth prisons more likely to stay standing? The school prison nexus is destroying lives and futures. It's destroying childhoods. I wonder if one way it continues to sustain itself is by virtue of youth prisons being more and not less humane spaces of incarceration. Please let me be clear. I am not arguing for less humane youth prisons. I am arguing for no youth prisons. At the same time, we cannot let the existence of literacy programs, along with other educational programs and counseling and health services in youth prisons, distract us from the fact that there should not be a thing we call a youth prison, and there should not be a framework for seeing young people as criminals. We need research that helps us think and work toward two goals: the most humanizing treatment of young people who are locked up right now, and the abolition of youth prisons and the very idea of criminalized youth. Most young writers in Writing is Our Right workshops did not express very much interest in my research. I do not mean they did not express interest in participating in the study, which is true, many did not. I mean, they did not care that I was writing a dissertation on what was happening in our writing workshops that evening. What they cared about was my interest in their stories, my presence on Monday night, my listening to them. They cared about whether I could deliver the snacks they wanted from the prison canteen. Always chocolate chip muffins, not blueberry. They cared about whether I could convince the officer in charge to grant permission for them to leave a workshop early and make a phone call. They cared about whether Writing is Our Right would provide certificates they could bring to the next court date to show the judge. They cared about going home. Throughout the study, I centered the words of young writers experiencing incarceration, asking them to write about freedom so that I could bring their freedom dreams to conversations about literacy, pedagogy, and abolition. And now I want to give them the last word. Here is Felix with an appropriate message for all of us in education. It's an abolitionist message, which means to me that it's a hopeful one. Improving the schools. I think that they should put more programs in schools. They are building more jails when they should be building more schools. I also think that they should put more money into our community and into schools. They should eliminate unnecessary things and add the needed things like arts and crafts, sports, poetry, spoken word, color guard, and encore programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for such a powerful presentation. Like I've said before, I look forward to seeing this work in print and the dissertation. I want to open up the conversation now. We have time for maybe one or two questions. Anyone like to ask a question or comment?
I just want Maisha to unmute herself so I can hear her clapping.
Yes. From the kids as well.
That is so powerful, Adam.
Thank you.
Was that Dr. Higgs? Okay, there you are, Dr. Higgs.
So many wonderful compliments in the chat. Hopefully Adam will get to save these. Will we get to save these for him?
Yes, I will send them to him when I get this transcript. I think we have a question. Thank you. Rebecca, go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Adam. Very interesting stuff. And I was especially interested in the students who were thinking about being free in their own minds and where those ideas may have come from. Did they generate them themselves, or were you supporting them in thinking in those ways? Or do you know?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thank you so much. One of the tricks of doing the research that I did with young people in youth prisons is that if you get access, right, if you are invited in for any number of reasons, you're in and you're out. I mean, it was tough to know what had happened an hour before or the day before. So I don't have enough of a background. And I was able to do 5 interviews with young people. And the question of the interior freedom was not raised by any of them. I think from just kind of being in the spaces for 2 years, I could say that there were books on the bookshelf that were revolutionary in ways. There were speakers and programs that would come, and I'm thinking of a chaplain particularly, like truly inspire the guys that I was working with by sharing thoughts that must have had at some point something to do with, okay, we're all locked up in here, but what does that mean for how you approach that? What does that mean for how you think about that? And are you aware, can I help make you aware of the long, long, long history of prison writings and prison liberation thought that has happened inside cells? So I don't have a specific or great answer to your question, except that I think there was literature and there was thoughts from people coming in from the outside. And I do think when you're locked up and when you are taking writing and reading seriously, that you can talk about these things with other people like yourself who are locked up. So there may have been a generative sense to these ideas. I would bet that there was, but I was not able to document that. I don't want to say for sure, but thank you for that question. I think it's something I'd like to pursue, going back into the data.
Thank you.
I have one more question from Audrey. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you. That was super powerful. And I was definitely moved at points. And I just really appreciate you sharing your research. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how students' identities or how many times they had been locked up or experienced incarceration or length of time experiencing incarceration affected some of their notions of freedom.
Sure. So thank you for your question, Audrey. It brings to mind two young guys I got to interview. One had been in the Northern County Youth Prison since before I started going with Writing as a Right in 2017. And he was there when I stopped going in 2019. What is the case for a lot of these guys is with serious charges is that they go to court monthly or so, and they find out that everything's been pushed back until next month. And that had happened to this young man frequently. He told me he was going to court next week, and every time he goes to court, it's possible that they send him home or that they decide there's going to be a trial starting next week, which is usually not good for somebody in this situation to have a trial, or that they're going to be sent back to the youth prison and told to come back next month, and we'll see what we're going to say about the case then. So his ideas of freedom were pretty jaded. That's not the best word to use, but that's what comes to mind. And he certainly had a lot of, there's a lot of legitimacy to his thoughts. I mean, I asked him specifically, it was a rough interview because he was a quiet guy. And I asked him, like, do you ever feel free in here? And he was like, no, man, fuck this place. And I said, okay, like, what about writing? Like, no, no, no. Right? I have a quote somewhere in the dissertation, like, writing does not make me feel free, parentheses, laughter. Like, it was like scoffing at the idea, right? But there was another young person in that I interviewed in the Central County Youth Prison who said writing was helpful, but really what it was that helped him feel free inside was reading. And he loved reading, right? It can remind you of this Emily Dickinson poem, right? There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away. He could just, if he needed to, be in a cell and with a book, feeling free. And he had just been in, very short amount of time. He in fact turned 18 there. And he wrote about having a birthday in prison. And he wrote about when he was 17 and a half, if you told him he was gonna have his 18th birthday in prison, he would have been like, what are you talking about? So it wasn't a specific question that I focused on in my work. It hasn't been a question I focused on in my work yet, on how length of time and identity influences and informs your perspective on freedom. But it's something now I'm really excited to look into. Thanks for your question.
Thank you all for joining us. You have a great question in the chat room, but I want to give folks an opportunity to leave if they need to. And Adam, if you want to grapple with that, it's just a powerful question by Dr. Mariana Soto-Manning. But thank you all for joining us. I will keep us on for those who want to hear Adam maybe engage a little, if you have time, Adam.
Or you can decide to engage later if you're just done. It's been such a powerful presentation. I definitely don't want to keep you. It's like one of the questions that I had. The other one was, what are some of the lessons for us about the US having the child and youth partitioned as binary, whereas worldly, the United Nations and other humanitarian agencies have child and you want up to 18. So you can pick whether you want this one or the teacher education one that I put on the box.
Thank you for your questions, Mariana. Let me read this one that's in the box. Okay, I just want to gesture toward the second question and say, it's such a great point, and I don't know why. Well, I don't know why, but I could guess why you're not a child in the United States when you're 16 and 17 and 18. But you know, the UN, as you rightly pointed out, says that you are globally. I think it'd be very hard to admit that we're locking up children and we're stealing away the childhoods and the childness of a human being. So it's much easier to have youth prisons than child prisons, just epistemologically, ontologically, ideologically. But to this question about teacher education, I don't think every teacher or teacher educator needs to be spending time in youth prisons. Ideally, youth and child prisons won't exist and you won't be able to spend time in them much anymore. But what I learned from my work is that young people have the ability to generate and produce knowledge and critical thinking that really matters to the important questions in front of us, not the important questions of the curriculum. Sometimes those go hand in hand and sometimes they do not. But I think, what actions do teacher educators and teachers need to engage in? The engage is the piece. They need to engage their youth. They need to be asking young people in front of them, what are the questions and concerns you have about the world that you're living in and about what you are excited for or fearful for of the future that will be yours. In the dissertation, in my work, I didn't enter 2 years ago thinking that I was going to ask young people about freedom. It wasn't a question in my qualifying exam. It wasn't a question in my dissertation proposal. It became a question because I spent time with young people who are incarcerated. I read lots and lots of their writing, and I realized that they were always writing about freedom. And so then I wanted to ask them about freedom. So I think teacher educators and teachers, you can do that with all of your students, wherever you are situated.
Thank you so much. And thank you for such a sharing your powerful document with me. It's been an honor to read it and engage with it.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you all for joining us once again. This has been a great start to our spring quarter PhD colloquium series. Please join us next week when we have Dr. Casey Mastrip, who will be presenting her work. Again, thank you all. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate your work. I love your work. And I can't wait to teach your book in my class.
Thank you, Adam. So proud of you.
Hey, Adam. Woo-hoo.
Congratulations.
The macrobug shows some of the places from which group.
Thank you to the Musser family as well for joining us. Megan, great to see you on.
And Ramon family, so good to see you.
Some